So I'm going to turn it around.
Hello, testing. Nice. Good. There's people in Belgium that are here. That's great. How's the microphone working? Couple minutes till 1600. Emily's dogs are going crazy, so we'll let that happen and you can enjoy that. Thanks, Susie. All right, we got about a minute, and then I'll start running my mouth. For all you bored people. Yeah, I'm not really saying anything yet, just yet, Karen. But I've heard from other people that the microphone's working. All right, it says 1600, so I'm going to start. Welcome to the happy hour thing. Emily set all this up. She's sitting across from me to make sure that I don't do anything wrong. She has a large stick that she can use to strike me with if I cuss or say something untoward. So she gave me a cool little sheet to read off. And she told me not to say too much, which I am, so I'll stop. See, she's shaking her head. I'm failing already. So here's my sheet. A little bit of a guide. So I started out, I grew up in Utah, in and around Salt Lake City, and I joined the military the day I turned 17. I joined the Army Reserves. Actually, it was the Army National Guard. I wanted to be a Green Beret. I joined in 1984. So coming up, I was a big fan of Green Beret movies. Vietnam was the war that had just ended. And so all the books then and the movies were about Green Berets. I didn't even know what a SEAL was. So at any rate, they had this program where I could join and go to boot camp in the summer between my junior and senior year. And then for me, I had enough time that I could go to jump school at Fort Benning. So when I was at Fort Benning, I was the guidon bearer and the keeper of the wings, which is the youngest guy in the class has to carry, I don't know if they still do it, but there's a pair of jump wings that you're trying to earn, and that young guy, me in this case, has to carry those. And so I was that guy, so all the instructors knew who I was. And the company commander was a ranger, and he was a badass. And so as a kid, I'm 17 years old, been reading books about guys like this company commander of mine. So to me, he's kind of a god. And we're running one day up those hills at Fort Benning, and he said, "Hatch, you ever heard about the Navy SEALs? They come through here every once in a while." And I said, "Nah, I never heard of them." And he said, "Well, maybe you ought to check them out. They're kind of crazy, like you." And I was like, well, whatever, I just wanted to be a Green Beret. Anyway, I got home from that, went to finish my senior year of high school, did not do that, spent a lot of time doing other things. But I did get this thing out called an encyclopedia, which we didn't have the internet then. So I read about Navy SEALs, and to be honest, man, there was a photo of some dudes on the beaches with machine guns, and I was like, dude, that's it, 17, I'm on it. All laughing aside, when I was about 15, I read a book called Delta Force by a guy named Colonel Charlie Beckwith, who was the first commander of Delta Force. And it was moving to me, and he was very moving as an individual. I just thought he was the man. So I wrote him a letter, handwritten letter. He was down in Texas, and I said, "Hey, Colonel Beckwith, I want to join the military, and I want to I want to be in a good unit, and I want to, fight. And I'd like your advice. And he said, basically he wrote me back. He said, my advice is to work as hard as you can on whatever you decide. Always work really hard. So I was kind of keen on the Army thing, but I went back, looked at the Navy SEAL stuff, decided that was cool, and I went to a Navy recruiter. I'll never forget his name. It was Cecil Kessler. He was a PN1, so he was a personnelman. He did the paperwork, got me in the Navy. I went in the Navy. Didn't do very well. I got in trouble right away. Went to the UCMJ. We call it a captain's mast in the Navy and in the Army. I think you call it an Article 15. I was actually in medic school, and I grabbed a pair of scrubs one day. We were all wearing scrubs, and I grabbed a pair and took them home because, hell, why not, right? So there were about 5 or 6 of us that did that, and we all got in trouble, kicked out of medic school, and sent to a ship. And I joke about it in the speeches that I give, but a ship is like jail, except you can drown. I don't know why people go on cruises. I don't get it, man. I don't like them. Regardless, finally got to go to Buds. 10 minutes into Hell Week, I quit. Biggest guy in our class got up and he quit, and I thought, man, I just didn't have a lot of confidence. And I thought, man, if that guy, if he can't be here, I sure as hell don't belong here. Me and like 10 other idiots got up and rang the bell. Out in the Navy, back on a ship, a boot in my ass for 3.5 years. And I did jobs that I didn't want to do, and I worked with people I didn't like, and there were good people there as well, but I developed a little bit of character. I went back to SEAL training. I went in 89, graduated in January of 1990, Buds Class 164. Went right away to SEAL Team 8, which had just started, and did some deployments there, all peacetime stuff. And then screened to go to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Did that as a boat driver. So we didn't have SWCC guys then, so I was a boat driver. And did that for a few years, and then went to another selection, they call it Green Team, and spent some time in a different squadron. And then in 2000, I left to join the Navy parachute team. I tried out for the Navy parachute team. I'd never been to a Major League Baseball game in my life, and I really liked skydiving, so it made sense. And I went out there at the end of 2000, beginning of 2001. I jumped into my first baseball game. It was a Dodgers opener in Chavez Ravine. They were playing the Milwaukee Brewers, and it was an amazing game. I remember jumping into that stadium, and they were like, it was sold out, 52,000 people. I didn't hear anything. I was so scared, man. I remember flying over second base, landing in center field, and looking. There was a picture of Jackie Robinson on the center field wall. It was one of the great memories. Anyway, shortly after that, I got in an accident with a guy. We were practicing maneuver, and I wasn't all that great at those. I wasn't exactly a top performer. At any rate, we had a piece of gear malfunction, and we hit the ground with both of our parachutes kind of pointing at the ground. And the guy I was with, he had a lot more experience than me, and he definitely saved us. But I smashed my head in. I was unconscious for about a week, and then I broke my back and had some paralysis on my right side. Took me a while to get back. Towards the end of the year, after 9/11, I went back, and head injuries cause you to be really angry, and I didn't know that, and I don't think anybody really around me understood that. Regardless, I was disrespectful, said some things I probably shouldn't have, and my penalty lap for that was getting kicked off the Navy parachute team, and I went to the military freefall school out in Yuma, which was really cool. I didn't like working for the Army. No offense against my Army friends. Just as an organization, it was shocking to me at how crazy the stuff they did. I'll never forget, my next door neighbor was he was my first line supervisor. He was a sergeant first class. He was a 7th group guy, Abe Sanchez. And God bless him, man. He's like a saint. Poor guy had to have me working for him. But I remember one day he came up to me and said, "Hey, man, I need to go inspect your car with you." And I said, "What?" I said, "Abe, man, I'm a 35-year-old man. My car's fine." He goes, "No, Jimmy, it's something. I got a piece of paper here. I got to go through it with you." And I'm like, "Abe, you're my next door neighbor." He's like, "Jimmy, it's just an Army thing." I was losing my mind over it, but the company commander let me know the deal that more soldiers are killed in auto accidents because of poor maintenance than are killed in just about anything else, especially during holiday weekends. So I I did do a lot of jumping out there. I did work with some really great Marines, Rangers, SF guys, Air Force guys, some EOD guys, Navy. There were some other SEALs out there. The jumping was really fun. I learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes. I was really cocky, and I got in a little bit of trouble out there too, but not enough trouble that it would keep me from being able to go back to my former unit in Virginia. So the late 2004, I went back, and then I started deploying in 2005. The rest of the stuff's kind of in the book, the different deployments I did and the things that went on. I really wanted to do the book. I remember when I decided that I wanted to write a book. It was one of my first deployments in Iraq in, I think it was probably 2005. And I watched a buddy of mine who was a left-handed shooter. He was a team leader at the time. And I was outside with Spike. I was kneeling, and I watched him do the entry, and I could see into the first room from where I was sitting with the dog. And there were some booms going on, some screaming stuff going on inside. And I saw some children running around in the room, and I saw that team leader. He had his left hand on his rifle. He reached over and he grabbed those kids and he pulled them behind him. So the bad guys, which they did on occasion, would throw their kids at you to put them between you and them so that they wouldn't get shot, but you would. And we didn't train for that. Like, we didn't set up, practice runs in the kill house with, children running around. It just didn't happen. That's just a natural, good American thing. But it struck me, and the mission continued, and it got worked out, and everybody went home safe, pretty much. But it was so compelling to me that was just how he reacted, and I just thought, man, people kind of need to know about that. So I guess I was a sellout from early on, if that's what you want to call it. But the biggest thing about the book for me was I did it with a friend of mine named Christian DeAndrea, and the guy went to Harvard and Oxford. He's brilliant, and he's really good at literature, and he knew how to structure things, and he lived some of these stories that are in the book with me. We were friends before, and he spent some time with me in the hospital after I was wounded. I wanted to see if I could talk about what I did in a way that would make other people not do some of the stupid things that I did, and and I also wanted to get some stuff off my chest, and that helped. It was difficult. I'm glad it's doing as well as it is, and what I mean by that, the book probably hasn't sold all that many. I don't think I've made any royalties off of it yet, but hey, the day's young. But what I do get often are emails or messages on social media from people that have read it, and they say some really amazing things, and that makes me happier than if I would have, my co-author and I would have got a Pulitzer for it. I just am blown away that it affects people, and that's really what I wanted, and I'm really grateful for any feedback. So let me go down my list here. Yeah, then she wants to talk about Yale. So in 2014, I started Spike's Canine Fund, and the details of that are in the book, but essentially I just couldn't find anywhere to make my work meaningful. I tried a couple of different things after I went through different psych hospitals and all the surgeries on my leg, and I just couldn't find a spot. And so I started helping out with the local police department, who had intervened on my behalf on a night when I was suicidal and liquored up and high on meds. And a couple of cops came to my house. My wife got the gun away from me, and a couple of police officers came to my house, and they changed my life. They set my trajectory so that I'm sitting here talking to you today as the founder of Spike's Canine Fund and a student at Yale. It's important for me to say this quote that I came up with at some point about their actions and the example that they gave me. And that quote is, "Never underestimate your ability to affect the trajectory of another human's life, especially at their lowest moment." And I was in my lowest moment, man. I just wanted to die. Those guys came to my house, and I figured, hey, man, these guys will want to fight, and I like to fight. Maybe I can get them to shoot me in the head because I didn't have the minerals to do it myself. And those guys, they came up. They were calm, professional. They talked to me like they gave a shit. No small thing, man. They could have given me a beating. I had it coming, or a tasing at least. They didn't do any of that. They just made me feel like they gave a damn. And that's a valuable thing. I think it was Toni Morrison. I get the person who wrote this wrong on occasion, so if I do, I apologize. But I think it was Toni Morrison said, people aren't going to remember what you do for them, but they're going to remember how you make them feel. Those guys made me feel like they gave a shit, and I kind of needed that. Anyway, so I went to the psych stuff, hospitalizations, and got home. Couldn't find work, so I went back to that same police department. They had a canine department, and I said, hey, man, can I come help you? And they didn't need my help, but I think they knew that I'd done a lot of stuff overseas with dogs and that I'd found real bombs and been in gunfights with dogs. And they, more than anything, they knew that I needed somebody to put their arm around me and say, hey, it's going to be all right. So they let me work with them. On occasion, I took pictures. I wore the bite suit. It was cool. But one of their dogs got sick, and the city just didn't have the funding to fix him, provide the surgery. So I remember the officer being pretty despondent. The dog had done a good job for him and done some pretty tough things. And I thought, man, how can I help? So I took a picture of me and Spike, the one that's on the cover of the book. And I went to a friend who knows how to use, Photoshop, and we put together a logo, and I put them on sweatshirts and sold a bunch. And I made enough, on social media. I put out that I was trying to pay for a surgery for a dog, and didn't realize how much people love dogs. And I ended up raising plenty of money for the surgery and to pay for the officer's travel. And at that, I was off to the races. So that was 2014. 2015, we got our nonprofit status. I had some really good friends in the business world, personal friends who are very successful, who helped me figure out how to get the 501c3 set up with the various, governmental regulations that go along with it. And I also had some really good advice from a guy who I'd done a speech for another nonprofit, a big nonprofit in New York City that has to raise a lot of money annually, and he gave me some really good advice about how to conduct business, and that's why we don't have an office. That's why we do most of our work at our kitchen tables, and we try to keep overhead low. And the bottom line for us is how many cents of that dollar goes to the dogs, and so we're at about 84 cents right now, I think. But our new numbers for last year will come up soon, and we can update that. And all that information, by the way, is on our website. I feel like transparency is super important with nonprofits. As a wounded guy, I've been involved as a requester of assistance from different nonprofits, and some of them do business better than others. When people donate to Spike's Canine Fund, they don't want their money going to me throwing a party in Las Vegas for my friends. They want their money to go to the dogs, and so that's what we try to do. Let's see. So Spike's Canine Fund's going well last year, and then at the beginning of this year, and I went jumping with a friend of mine, a former troop commander from my former unit, not one of mine, but a guy I knew really well and I thought very highly of. Asked me if I'd go jumping with him and a guy who's a professor up at Yale. And I said, heck yeah, I'd love to do that because I like jumping. And we went for a jump, and the guy, I thought, professor at Yale, some probably bent in half geek with, Coke bottle glasses and hair like mine. Not the case. The guy's name's Zach Cooper, and he's an economics guy, and he's a pro, particularly in the healthcare arena. You can find some stuff that he's written recently, and he's done a lot of work with different political groups trying to figure out how the best way forward with this pandemic. At any rate, we went for a skydive, and then he asked me to come up to New Haven, to Yale, and check out Yale. I did a tiny little speech, and not many people there. And then we went to dinner, and he'd mentioned this thing called the Eli Whitney program, and we went to dinner with a guy named Jim Levinson, who runs a thing called the Jackson Institute, which is a pretty amazing organization at Yale. And he brought it up again, so I thought, haha, Yale, But Zach sent me the link to the Eli Whitney program, and I just couldn't throw it away. I couldn't delete it. So one day I decided, heck with it, man, I'm going to apply. So I went through the application process, which is hilarious because you have to write some essays, and essays are a pretty big deal. I didn't realize that, but they seemed rather simple to me. Some kind of simple questions. So in all, the application probably took me about 45 minutes to an hour, something like that, which I guess isn't what you should do when you're applying to an Ivy League school. So I sent the application in, clicked send, and I called my buddy Zach, and I'm like, hey man, I just want you to know, I went ahead and filled out the application. And he said, what? I said, yeah, I did the application. He said, did you do the essays? I said, yeah, it took me about 15, 20 minutes on each of them. He's like, Jimmy, people spend thousands of dollars to get help with those essays. Those essays are huge. please ask them if you can resubmit them. So I sent the admissions folks an email. I said, hey, can I resubmit those essays? And they're like, no, you can't, but you can submit 2 more if you'd like. So I did that. I got a couple other essays out there, and I got some help with them. And at any rate, I did not believe that I would be accepted at all. I had some friends write some recommendations, including a guy named Chris Domensic, who was the ground force commander on the mission that I was heard on. Pretty amazing dude. And I got in, and I was shocked. And so then I had to ask my wife, hey, what, am I going to move to Connecticut, or are we going to do this? And she said, you'd be an idiot not to. And so I went up there. I was scared to death. And I want to be a humanities major just because I like the humanities. And the professor who is in charge of she's the director of undergraduate studies for the humanities, is named Norma Thompson. And she is a lion, an academic lion. She's an amazing woman. She said, hey, you should look at this thing called directed studies. And I thought, okay. So I applied for that, and they let me into that, which was crazy. And directed studies is an incredible program. It's kind of covering the great works, the Western canon. So you read, there's 3 subjects: philosophy, history and politics, which is one, and then literature. And each week you have a different book you're reading from, and you have a lecture in each of those subject areas, and you have a paper due almost every week. Sometimes you miss a week. And there are extra curriculars as well, colloquiums they call them, which I can't spell, and I probably didn't even say it right. At any rate, it was incredible, and my classmates were incredible. I didn't know what I was going to run into there, but I was afraid that they weren't going to be all that keen on having me there. I was wrong about that. Kids are amazing. I would recommend that if anybody's really bummed out and thinking that the kids right now don't have their shit together, you're welcome to come join me in New Haven when we get this stuff going again, because they're amazing, and it's changed my perspective on everything. I'm a lot more positive than I used to be. My first day back at school was rough, and I was scared to death, man, honestly. And these kids are not amateurs when it comes to this academic stuff. So I'm sitting in this class with these 18-year-old kids. They're kids, but they're amazing. And the way they talk is amazing. And the way they grasp these super tough readings, I've used amazing too much, but there I go. Question: how has this journey helped in my personal life? I've been through a lot of different types of mental health treatment programs, and being a student at Yale is incredibly helpful, especially reading the books that we were reading, starting with the Iliad, and Plato, and then, it's amazing. Again, amazing. Advice for people struggling during the pandemic. Yeah, I think my secret to getting through stuff like this is to find somebody to help. Because, I've helped a few kids go to SEAL training, and I wasn't a great SEAL student. But I remember when I was thinking or worried about my buddies, I wasn't thinking about how miserable I was. And there's plenty of people who need help right now. And so that's what I would recommend. I mean, there's food banks that need help. There's all kinds of people that need help. And I think that's my advice. So I have a few questions here, but we're going to go through some more questions as well if you guys have them. These were the ones that got sent in earlier. And the first question is, how did you learn to be a handler? I learned to be a handler from a guy named Jeff Franklin, who runs a company called Cobra Canine. And he was a police officer. He was a Marine first, and he was a police officer, and then he worked at a major kennel, Von Lick Kennels in Indiana. And then my unit hired him, and he came in, and he didn't know anything about us, really. And I didn't know anything about dogs, really, and I didn't really understand exactly how we were going to use them. And I got a dog named Spike that he picked. Jeff Franklin picked him. And Spike was, one of the guys I worked with said he was a push-button dog, which means essentially he was fairly easy, which was probably true and probably what I needed. But what he was really was strong, and he could compensate for I was the weak link in that team for sure. And we had some success together. But the training I got initially right off the bat was from Jeff Franklin. And then they brought another guy named Jim Haggerty, who's a trainer now for the ATF. And he was a police officer for a long time. And between the two of those guys, I learned a lot. And these are the kind of guys where I would run into a problem overseas, and I could get on the phone and say, hey, man, this is what happened tonight, and what can I do to improve things? And so we'd talk things out on the phone. I'd go back outside before the sun came up and work on the things that I needed to work on with the dog. Again, I was the weak link with the dog. He was a KMPD dog, and he was amazing. We can talk about that more questions. I'm glad to entertain those. I love talking about dogs. Next question. In your book, you said you wrote a white paper on the use of canines. How much of that came true? So what the person is referring to, in the 90s at my unit, I wrote a point paper essentially saying, hey, we should incorporate dogs in some of our mission sets. Without getting into too much details, dogs can find people pretty quick, and bombs and other things, that you train them to find quicker than a human or a lot of humans. Like a dog can do the work of 10 people a lot quicker. Well, there wasn't really a whole lot of interest in what I had to say then, but after I left and then, came back and the wars had kind of started, there was a really strong Master Chief at my old unit that they asked to start up a canine program, and he, one of the hardest working human beings I've ever known, he set it up from scratch, and the Army guys helped us out a lot because they were quite a ways ahead of us on what we were doing. The canines are a very big value added in military operations, I believe, and police operations as well. But I think there are some difficulties in implementing dogs into some of the more difficult technical close-in fighting situations. And so there takes a certain amount of investment by the whole team, whether it's a SWAT team or a SEAL team or an A team or a Ranger battalion, right? There has to be some investment by everybody to use this tool to make it effective, and so it took us a while. And those things ebb and flow. There's times when we did really well, and there's times when we haven't. This is a good question. Given that when all is said and done, more is said than done, I believe that. How do we find peace? So it's a really good question. And here's the thing. I waited, after I got out of the service, I'd spent, almost 26 years in the service. I had always had somebody giving me a mission and a job, and it was my identity. And I felt like I wasn't responsible for creating those things in my own life. So when it was time for me to be in charge of that, to find peace and to do the work that I wanted to do, I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't have the courage to say, this is what I'm going to do. So have the courage to find peace. Make the choices that'll get you to where you can feel better. There's a book called Man's Search for Meaning by a guy named Viktor Frankl, and I'm probably going to mess the quote up, but basically he said, we have a very small window of freedom in our lives. We can't control the circumstances that address us. We can't control what happens after we make a decision on how we're going to deal with those circumstances. But what we can control is how we feel during that little bit of time between when we get circumstances and we got to make a decision about how to deal with them. That's our freedom. So think about those little teeny pockets, man. Think about where you can make the choices that you can affect change for you. Change the things that you can, and don't worry about the things that you can't change, which is great advice, and I can't always live by it, but I like it. What are you laughing at, Emily?
Because I have...
I'm trying to be serious.
I know, you're doing great. I do have some new questions that just came in. Let's start that off. What is your favorite condiment on hot dogs, and why is it ketchup?
Okay, listen. This ketchup hot dog thing is not funny. It's not funny, and whoever sent that question in, do you know who it was?
Yes.
Who?
I can't tell.
Tell me who it was.
I can't tell.
The people want to know.
No.
Listen,
Anonymous.
Ketchup does not belong on a hot dog. Never has. Dirty Harry. Watch a Dirty Harry. He explains it. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'll post a YouTube link later. Ketchup does not belong on hot dogs. In fact, it doesn't really belong on any meat as far as I'm concerned. Ketchup is for French fries, essentially. Or maybe onion rings. That's about it. And I don't think it should be used ever on a hot dog. In fact, I think it's un-American. I think it's a North Korean thing. I think you should move over to North Korea and hang out with Kim Jong-un because that's what probably he eats. And I don't even want to talk about that ever again. Thank you. Next question.
What is something you're naturally good at?
Something I'm naturally good at? Finding stuff I'm not good at, right? Like, I decided I wanted to have a one wheel, one of those one wheels that. And I'm like, hey, yeah, I'm in my 50s, but I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Emergency room visit? Man, I busted my ass on that thing. I gave it to a young friend at Yale so he could ride the 1.5 miles to get to see his girlfriend. And I'm glad I got rid of it. Things I'm naturally good at, I love skydiving, man. And I don't know that I'm naturally good at it because I've been doing it a long time and I can't really do all that much, but I really, really love it. And I love taking photos. And I like eating. I'm a natural at that.
Somebody asked, is Emily always on time?
Emily, this is a problem. And K. Paige Widener, what's the most basic thing you've ever done? That's great. That's great, Paige. I hate you. Emily struggled. When we first started, God bless her, because I couldn't figure out why she thought it was okay to be late. I'll tell the story. So our very first trip together to a big speech where we're doing Canada stuff was to Canada. We were invited to go to the Canadian seminar where all the different handlers from across Canada come, and there's lectures and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I was speaking, and we got there. Her hotel room was right across the hall from mine. I said, hey, I'll see you at 8 o'clock. I'll knock on your door and we'll grab breakfast and then we'll get started. She's like, great. So 8 o'clock, boom, boom, boom. I beat on her door, nothing. So I beat on, boom, boom, boom. I beat on again. She opens the door. She's got this curling iron thing in her hair and she's chomping gum.
No.
She's like, I need like 10 minutes. Dude, I lost my mind. I was like, 10 minutes? Like, in my line of work, if you're 10 minutes late, the helicopter's leaving, you get your head chopped off. It was insane. It took a while. We had some bad run-ins. What's 10 minutes? What's 10 minutes? The point is, you shouldn't waste other people's time. Emily has learned some hard lessons. Yeah, there was a burrito throwing incident, but that's for later. That's probably for Emily's book. They'll probably do better than mine.
Shannon asked, did that rep count?
Oh. Paige.
If you had dropped out of buds the second time you went through, what do you think you would be doing now?
I would probably be... Man, I can't even imagine that. I don't know. I'd probably be working construction somewhere or something. I don't know. I have no clue. Anything else?
Yep. In some of your past pictures, you've had a New York Mets hat on, and then all of a sudden you're wearing a Cubs hat. Why did you become a fair weather fan of the Cubs right after they won the World Series?
Jason, you're going to pay for that. So look, I had a bet. The chairman of our board is a fellow named Jason, and he lives in Ohio, which is a good thing, because if he lived in Virginia, we'd be fighting tonight. So
It's not Jason.
Yeah, it's Jason. So you can't even lie well still. So we had a bet. He's a huge Cubs fan. In fact, if there's any Chicago police listening, I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but he has stolen, while his children were running the bases, he has stolen dirt out of the infield.
You don't say that.
Yes, I do. I say it. He stole the dirt. He's got it in a bottle at his house. He lives in Springboro, Ohio. Anyway, so we bet on the Mets and the Cubs in the playoffs, and the Mets won. And so he had to wear a Mets hat for a year. That was the bet. And then the next year we bet again, and I lost. And I think it was the Dodgers and the Cubs that year. So I had to wear a Cubs hat for a year as well. And it was unfortunate because everybody thought I was a loser. You know, they felt sorry for me, which I kind of feel sorry for most Cubs fans. Next question.
What is something that no matter how hard you tried, you suck at?
I try to be handy. Like, I can break stuff, but I can't fix much. I mean, I can mess around and do little things, but I'm not. That's my wife. I'm not very good at doing handy stuff. Yeah. Big challenge for me as a canine handler on my first deployment, my friends in Poland. I love you guys. The big challenge for me was trying to be, trying not to make my personality was not always great. And I didn't want Spike's ability to help our unit be diminished by my personality. Emily, what are you doing? You're pushing buttons.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to the questions down here, but
I can see them.
No, you're looking at the comment. Okay. Those are the questions.
Basically, to answer that question, I didn't want my inadequacies and my weakness to slow Spike down because he was an amazing dog. What do you recommend for dog training for family type dogs, specific books, classes, etc.? Look, I need to cut a deal with these guys because I always recommend them. There's a website, I think it's called Leerburg, 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 and they have streaming videos, and they have some incredible trainers on there, and they're really, really good. Trauma Monkeys, Doc, how are you? How were you able to be comfortable in your own skin when so many others fit the mold to fit in? I don't know, man. I don't have a choice. I think, you know what, look, man, I just feel like there's a certain responsibility to be yourself. And sometimes that's not always a good thing, but you got to roll with it. And I'm not really interested in being part of the group. I think it's just not my thing. Any experience working with the Ranger Battalion guys and their dogs? Yes. The Rangers that I worked with were amazing. Most of my deployments I was with the guys from 2nd Battalion, and I didn't work with their dogs directly, but I did work with their gun teams, and they were badasses. And, you know, I'm going to say something about that. In the book I talk about the lone survivor stuff. When we walked up on that crash site in the morning, it was us and some Rangers from 2nd Battalion. And the bodies were down a ravine, probably 1,200 feet at least. And the Rangers went down there, because the bodies were all SEALs and TF-160 guys. The Rangers went down there and dragged those bodies up that side of that mountain. And that was no joke. Those dudes are really, really tough. I have a whole lot of respect for the Ranger battalions. What's the most surprising things to you with Spike's Canine Fund? I think the most surprising thing is how difficult it is to give people free shit. Like, I don't know why. Like, we have to call departments and say, hey, can we help your dogs? We want to protect all the dogs in the United States that do work on behalf of humans or a community. And I'm not talking about emotional support dogs, no offense. I'm talking about police dogs, fire department dogs, search and rescue dogs, military dogs. We want to provide what those dogs need to perform their duties and to do it effectively and with the best stuff we can find. And then we want to take care of them medically. So to me, it's surprising when we come to a situation, whether it's a seminar or just a department, and we reach out to them and say, hey, look, we want to help you. And they're like, nah. It's just surprising to me. I think, there's a lot of different views on canines and, how to feel about them. And some people make fun of people like me who love them the way I do. and they just it's an animal or a tool that we use. And some people like me and a few others, they don't look at them like that. Hopefully that answers it. What do you envision for the next 5 years for Spike's Canine Fund? A lot more fundraising, although like right now it's tough. You can never really rely on things. You got to keep working and figure out new ways to raise money, which is part of the reason we're doing this. I want to be, my initial goal was to have helped 10% of the working canine population in the United States in 5 years, and we're not going to reach that. So 5 years from now, I would like to be at 15%. So there's roughly 25,000 working canines in the United States, so 10% would be 2,500. So I want to be above that. If we can do more, great. But that's my goal.
What dogs do you have in your family now?
What dogs do I have in my family now? I have a French bulldog named Lola, who's a maniac. And I have a pit bull named Pearl, who's a shelter dog. We always have a shelter dog. And she's at least 9, probably older. We don't know her age. And then Mina, my Dutch Shepherd, who Mike Suttle imported from Holland for me. And I went up to his place in West Virginia and picked her up. And she's been in fact, I used Learberg to train her. And she's been with me for 9 years in September. She goes to classes with me at Yale, and she loves the kids. She wasn't really super friendly until we went up there, and then for some reason she loves those kids up there, and so she's kind of social now, which is really cool. Did I serve with Herm Hermanson? Yep. How was he as a team? He's great. He's a stud. He's super smart, really smart, and I don't know what he's doing now. Whatever he's doing, I'm sure he's good at it. What do you recommend for dog training? Oh, I went through that. Susie, Rangers lead the way. Any advice for spouses to help with their service members' invisible injuries? That's a great question. What was the one thing that your wife did that was most helpful? So it's 2 questions, really. I think the advice to me right now is you got to be honest. And I would find the people that your spouse looks up to and maybe approach them and say, hey, maybe you can help in ways that I can't. And my wife was pretty smart at getting the guys that I worked with that had saved my life or that she knew that I looked up to check in on me, or they would most of the time anyway. But if I was really struggling, she'd call them and say, hey, man, he's struggling right now. That's not going to get anybody in trouble. But she just tried to figure out the best resources that she could bring to bear for the situation. Hopefully that helps. Hey, you're welcome, Irish dude.
I noticed you didn't mention the decoy.
What?
He said he missed training with you and Scott, but no mention of the decoy.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Emily needs a little attention. She's a little hungover. She'll talk about that later. No. In fact, you could probably go to her Instagram stories and see the sangria deluge that she drove into her body last night. How many canines have we helped? I think we're at 10,000. I'm sorry, 10,000. 1,083. 1,083. Dewey, yeah. Dewey's right here. He's asleep. Let me show you. Not helping. Hi, Lola. You have a Lola. I saw Lola Mina Designs. I saw you guys. That's funny that you have the same name. Did you copy us? Huh? 1976 Pete's. What was the biggest surprise you had when going back to school this year? The single biggest surprise I had, and I'm still thinking about it, was I was invited to speak to a think tank writer. She is a brilliant woman who writes about different things from kind of a political stance. And I was asked to go with one other freshman. I was a freshman. With one other freshman in there was a junior, I think, and a sophomore student we're all humanities students. And we're talking to this woman, and the other freshman with me is a young woman named Zipporah Price, who's from the south side of Chicago, activist, part of Black Lives Matter, leads with her chest. Like, her heart is as big as the city of Chicago. I mean, she's an amazing, strong young woman who is going to do some amazing things in this world. So remember that name, Zipporah Price. But anyway, we were talking to this woman, and Zipporah's sitting next to me, and the woman's sitting across the table from us. And Zipporah said something like, you know, here in these classes in directed studies, it's a safe space to talk about, you know, whatever. And I looked at her, and I thought, you know, because where I come from, safe space is like, I mean, I would have laughed and just walked off if it would have been pretty much anybody else. But this young woman is tough and brave and strong. And when she said that, it just sent my brain sideways. And I could tell, I think that the woman sitting across from her was shocked as well. But she didn't know Zipporah like I did. Anyway, that threw me for a loop, because I thought in my mind what a safe space was is where nobody would say anything mean and you could be protected. And this girl doesn't need any of that. She's tough. She doesn't need anybody's help or anybody to protect her. What she meant by it was a place where we could talk about really tough issues without people acting like assholes. And, you know, for example, one of the things that we talked about in philosophy, you know, Aristotle had this idea that there are people who are born natural slaves. Now, as a 52-year-old white guy, that means one thing. To an 18-year-old African-American woman who lives on the south side of Chicago, that means something different. And she didn't need a safe space. She didn't need anybody coddling her. She wanted to be in an environment where she could sit with people that were reading the same stuff, and we could hash it out. And that was surprising. There were more and more discussions like that there. It's an amazing place, and if you are someone who is a non-traditional student and you haven't finished your undergrad, I would very much recommend taking a look at the Eli Whitney program. Yale doesn't tolerate pranks. Yes, Doc, they do not, and so you're not allowed to come visit.
Question mark?
Did that rep count? Yeah. Ranger Battalion. Okay, I'm through all those.
Okay.
Any more questions? I do want to read a quote to you. One of my kind of heroes in the world, especially now that I've met him, he's since passed away, but there was a guy named Harold Bloom who was an incredibly famous literary critic, and I read one of his books in 2005 in Afghanistan, and I got to meet him. He passed away a few months after I started at Yale, and he was actually one of my professors. He was close to 90, and he was in really bad health, and he taught from his home via video, and we gathered in a classroom and went over Shakespeare, and he thought Shakespeare was God. But he's written a bunch of books, and one of them is called How to Read and Why, and it's one of my favorites because I didn't have that academic background. But he wrote this. He was a big fan of reading, obviously. He wrote, "I don't know that we owe God or nature a death, but nature will collect anyway. And we certainly owe mediocrity nothing, whatever collectivity it purports to advance, or at least represent." That's the part about being yourself, right? Like, mediocrity. He wasn't down with it, I'm not down with it, and I don't think you should be either. Memorial Day, who do I think of? I think about a bunch of friends, some who died in training accidents, some guys who died in gunfights. And the thing that I struggle with is I think all those guys that I know that were contemporaries of mine were better people than I was, and it doesn't make sense to me why they would be killed and leave their families and I'd still be walking around. And I don't mean that to be trite. I mean, they were really good dudes. I worry about people forgetting them, and I just don't think that'll happen. And we're going to do what we can to make sure people don't forget those dogs either. So the question, did you select existentialism among your philosophical choices? I didn't really get that. So directed studies, they assign you a book and then you talk about what's in the book. So it wasn't really, I wasn't there yet. I don't even know what existential, no, I'm kidding. I'm sure I'll do some more of that. Philosophy was really, really hard for me. The professors that I had were amazing. still, it was really tough. Hey, Adam. I'm inspiring. Thank you. I don't know why he has to do this. That's how he likes to play. All right, I guess if we don't have any questions, I'll get going. Think about making a donation if you got it in you. I know right now is a tough time economically, so no big deal. If you want to read the book, we sell it at our store. Go to touchingthedragon.com, and that link will take you right to the Spike's Canine Fund store, so all the proceeds from any of the books go to him, meaning his mission, Spike's mission, of taking care of the dogs. What else should I say, Emily? For those of you that showed up today, man, I really appreciate it, and you've helped. Some of you, I can see the names that have helped us, and I'm really, really grateful for it. This mission is a big deal to me. The dogs that I worked with, most of them were killed. Some of that was my fault, and so I want to make sure that I can do whatever I can with this team of incredible people that have decided to join me. To make sure that the dogs that are doing those jobs now on our behalf get what they need, both in equipment and healthcare. They deserve it. When military dogs retire, the military doesn't pay for their hospital bills, and some police departments is the same way. So we want to make sure that happens. And since we do have a few people left, I think it's important people know that more police dogs are killed in hot vehicles than are killed in fights with violent suspects. So we provide a system called a Hot and Pop, and we need to make sure that as many dogs that are going to go out and work this summer have those systems on their car or something similar. So if you could do me a favor, wherever you're at, ask the law enforcement folks that run canines where you're at if they need help, and tell them about us so we can do some good for them.
If they want us to do this again, what would they like us to do?
Yeah. If you would like us to do this again, what would be the things that you would like us to cover? Emily doesn't want me to show you her because she's a little hungover, like I said, the sangria.
It's true. Got me.
All right, I guess we're done then. Oh, no, here we go. You should do some more writing. Love my medium pieces. Thank you. I like that stuff. Have you ever considered becoming a technical advisor on a TV or movie set? No. Can you talk about what sets Canine Storm apart? The vest. Yeah. So I haven't seen all of the vests that are made, but I've seen a lot of them. And the Canine Storm guys made the vests that I used with Spike and then the other dogs that I work with. And they're custom fit to each dog. And I think there are some other makers out there that do that. But Canine Storm, I have personal experience in combat with dogs where they were strapped to me and I was roping out of a helicopter and in a brownout and get bounced off a building, or I ended up having a rope when I didn't plan on it and the harness needed to hold up, or jumping out of an airplane with a dog strapped to you really, really high. Your parachute opens really, really hard. And Canine Storm, I asked them to make some adjustments to that harness, and they did. They had to go buy over $20,000 sewing machine to sew Kevlar loops into it so it could handle 1,200 pounds of dynamic pressure, which is important. They're guaranteed for life. Again, they're custom made. The ballistic ones, they've had documented saves of dogs being shot and living, going to work the next day because they had a vest on. There's a dog out in Washington State, got shot twice with a .40 Smith & Wesson, point blank. Vest saved him. He went back to work. So sent the vest back. Canine Storm guarantees all their stuff for life. So if we provide an officer a vest and something happens to it, unless the dog chews it, they won't fix it if the dog chews it. If you're lazy and you let the dog chew it, but you call them, they send you an envelope, overnight it. You overnight it to them, they fix it, and they send it back. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost the officers anything, and you get it back quickly. Plus, they're good people. Jim, who started Canine Storm, was a canine officer, got shot in the face with a shotgun. He's blind in one eye. His wife and his kids are involved with the business. I met the woman who's been sewing for them for a long time, and she probably is the lady that sewed Spike's vest. They give a damn about what they're doing, and I trust them. And if Spike's name is going to be attached to something, I want it to be what I consider to be the best. If anybody thinks they got a better vest, I'd love to have one sent to us, and I'll run it through the paces, and we'll see what happens. But I just don't feel like there's anybody out there that makes anything of the quality of Canine Storm and the support. Oh, here we go. What do you need if you want to be a volunteer at Spikes? You just need to email us, spikescaninefund@gmail.com, and we'll put you on our list depending on where you're at. And when we have something going on in that area, we'll get in touch with you. The other thing you can do is you don't even have to let us know you want to be a volunteer, but you can share the things that we have on social media. You can talk to people about what we do. You can talk to the law enforcement folks in your area. If you're near a military installation, you can talk to them and let them know that we're out there to try to help the dogs. Nice people saying nice things. My friend from Belgium, Holly. Do you think of making Spike's Canine Fun mouth masks? Emily came up with that the other day. Trendy. You're trendy as well, Ollie.
Susie said they should, or not Susie, Nita said we should call them human muzzles.
Human muzzles. Very good. Is there a way to adopt retired dogs if their handlers can't take them? Yes, there is. There are a couple of different organizations, and I think the Google machine can help you. Although I did recently post a link to a group that has brought in a bunch of explosive detection dogs that were being used in the Middle East, and they're coming home now, and they're not going to use them anymore, so they need to find homes for them. And I think if you go down the Spikes Canine Fund Facebook page and scroll down, I think you'll find that link. But I don't know right off the bat. I couldn't give you a specific name. There are different organizations that do it.
Like Strong Events live until 6/1. If they want to participate, there's still time.
The Spikes Strong Event. Go to the Facebook page. You can find that. It's a workout, and get a T-shirt. I think what, $35?
Mm-hmm.
And send us the video. We'll use it. What areas of the country do you see the most need? I think the South and rural areas where they don't have big budgets for canines. That's and that's the hardest place for us to get the word out. So the South and rural, particularly rural areas all over. We've put vests on dogs in pretty big cities like Indianapolis. We were able to provide vests for all of their dogs. The small towns in Indiana, that's a little bit harder. Dr. Highlander, hello. When's the next book? Never. Does VB have the hot pop systems? Yes. How about a video explaining the bite work you do with Mina for the next episode? Now, it's funny, man, that there's two guys came from Holland to do a training seminar here, and I asked them to watch her bite the bite sleeve, and they said, man, you really screwed her up, so I'm not the guy to learn how to do bite work from. Is there a Memorial Day for canines? I don't think so. I don't think there is. What if the bad guy chewed the vest? Well, that's a discussion you'll have to have with them. Yes, the question was, do any military handlers need care packages right now? Yeah, there's an organization that does that, and we've provided a link. Again, it's on our Facebook page. I think it's the MWD TSA. They have some people overseas that they're putting together care packages for, and they've got it's a simple list. You can get on Amazon and go through the list and purchase it, and they'll do the rest of the work. Staff of power, I don't know what you're talking about. Those are accusations, spurious at best. Friday night happy hour fundraiser with a group of former team members sharing stories acceptable for the public. No way, you will lie. Norfolk PD's good. Great. All right, I think we're going to go. It's been a little over an hour. I really appreciate everybody coming, and I hope you enjoyed it. Send us some feedback, and thank you. Peace.